Welcome to Functional Philosophy, the show in which I, Charles II, explain and apply Ayn Rand's philosophy, objectivism. If you'd like to ask me a question on objectivism or its application, just go to charles2.com/contact. And my last name is spelled T as in tango, E as in echo, and W as in whiskey. In recent years, I've heard quite a lot of news about hormonal and surgical treatment given to children with gender dysphoria. While I acknowledge that these are not something that one should be prevented from undergoing as an adult, I can't justify such options being available to a child. To what extent should the state restrict parents from harming their children? Well, first, I want to make clear that even though I agree with the questioner that hormonal treatments and so-called gender reassignment surgery should be legal, I do think undergoing such procedures is categorically immoral, both for the person undergoing them and for the doctors who facilitate them. As for children, without question, it should be illegal for parents to inject their kids with hormones or, dear God, give them surgery, unnecessary surgeries that mutilate them. Circumcision should be illegal, male circumcision and female circumcision, female circumcision is a weird thing because it can be both worse and not as bad as male circumcision, depending on how they do it. But all of that, all kinds of circumcision, all kinds of negative, anything that deviates from the biological standard in a negative way should be outlawed. I mean, in terms of doing it to your child. That is something somebody has to choose for himself. And so before somebody is old enough to choose for himself, nobody else can choose it for him. So yes, I don't think this is difficult at all. Absolutely, this should be illegal. And parents who try to give their kids hormones or have them undergo surgery to fix their gender or fix their sex to be in line with their view of their own gender, those parents should go to jail. Now, I am a little hesitant to say that, or to add that qualifier of deviating from the biological norm in a negative way, because that seems ripe for abuse. Of course, these people would say that you're not deviating in a negative way, you're fixing a problem. You're improving the child. And you could also say that in the future, when we have, if we ever get to a future where we have the ability to enhance people through certain kinds of intervention at a young age, you don't want to prevent that by saying that it deviates from the biological norm. But I suppose at that point you could say, well, in this new context, that's required. I mean, you couldn't say 100,000 years ago that it's child abuse not to teach your child to read, because that was the norm then. But today, when reading is essential to surviving, I'd say that it is a form of child abuse, or you're violating the child's rights by not teaching him to read. So this would be a contextual issue, I think. So I think you'd have to say that any deviation from the biologically normal would have to meet the standard of making the child capable of survival in a modern context. Now, to get to the principle which you ask about, to what extent should the state restrict parents from harming their children? Well, in some ways, the rights of children are not that different from the rights of adults. Parents do have the right to use force on their children, but that's because children have not developed their capacity for reason yet. But that doesn't mean parents have an unmitigated right to use force. They can use force to, let's say, keep their children from doing bad things or getting in trouble. Now, I don't think that corporal punishment should be illegal. I'm skeptical of the wisdom of that kind of thing, spanking your child, but it's not obvious that that's unnecessary in every case. However, I would say that you can draw the line where physically inflicting pain is unnecessary for keeping your child in line. That sounds harsher than I wanted it to, but just making sure your kid doesn't get into trouble. And again, I mean, you might say that something like spanking isn't necessary, but that's a gray enough area. I don't think you can make that illegal. Whereas, if you're beating up your kid or locking him in a closet or torturing him in some way, I mean, that is clearly not necessary. And so I think that would be the line. The line has to be, okay, are you going beyond what is necessary to make sure that your kid isn't, doing really bad things? And if you're going beyond that, then that would count as child abuse. So, if you're beating up your kid, then one of two things is happening. Either you're doing more than is necessary, or your kid is really bad and the police should be involved. And in which case you should not be doing that, because you should just call the police if your kid's doing things that you have to, go to that level to stop. But I think the most important point here is that any intervention to alter the natural development of the human body should have to meet a very high standard in order to be allowed. And giving your child hormone treatments, let alone surgery, because your child says that he feels like a girl, that is just self-evidently illegitimate. Children don't know what the hell they're talking about. And maybe he does, but it's impossible for a child to know. He doesn't have the experience. You don't have enough experience. He may grow out of it. I'm to understand that many of them do. I think you hear this all the time, that these people often grow up and just turn out to be gay. So this is completely wrong. You do not fix psychological disorders with surgery or by injecting things to change your biology. You certainly don't do that with children. Under what conditions would you say that harming an animal is a decent thing to do, and why? Parentheses, in the context of diet. Well, it would have been simpler to ask, is it okay to harm animals when it is nutritionally unnecessary to do so? Because that's really what you're asking here. Obviously, it is perfectly legitimate and selfish to kill animals and eat them for your own survival. Now, if you don't have to do that, is it still okay to kill them just for pleasure? And I'm taking a sophisticated understanding of necessary here, not, well, I will continue to exist in some emaciated or nutritionally deficient form if I don't eat meat. But no, we're saying if you can get everything you need to live a full life without killing any animal, and the only reason to kill them is for the taste, Is that okay? I'm taking that. That's how I'm interpreting your question, because that's the only way I can make it interesting. Well, first, I want to say that I don't believe we are in that context now. We are basically ignorant when it comes to the science of diet and food. No one seems to know what they're talking about. You hear different things all the time. It's constantly changing. Our epistemic standards are corrupt, so this is exactly what you would expect. But basically, I don't trust anything anybody says about diet outside of some basic ideas that are corroborated by my own experience. So, I don't think we are in a position where we can say that we are killing animals for pleasure when it is nutritionally unnecessary to do so. I think that we evolved to eat meat for a reason, and we have not passed beyond that stage of evolution, certainly, or even human development. I don't think we yet have substitutes for eating meat. I think meat is probably part of a healthy diet. I'm not a food scientist, but I also don't trust the ones who exist. But now, what if we get to the point where we develop a pill that provides us all of the calories and nutrients that we need? And so then the only reason we would eat animals is for pleasure. At that point, it would truly be that we are just harming animals because we have certain receptors in our body that can be stimulated when we rub their rub their corpses on those parts of our body, our tongue. Which is a grotesque way of thinking about it, but that's what it would be. We would simply have, at that point, an outdated biology. And I think the principle is that you want pleasure and joy and all forms of good feeling to result from actions that sustain your life. So, in that kind of situation, I would say that we should make the pill that provides us all of our nutrition feel really good to take, and in that way substitute for the pleasure we're losing by eating. And we shouldn't just stick to this outdated mode of gaining pleasure. We shouldn't have this view that we should stagnate. This is really a kind of traditionalism. If we move past a certain requirement for survival, if we solve a certain problem conclusively, if we change the activity that we need to engage in order to survive, then we should make it so that we should strive to make it so that that's what gives us pleasure. We should match our pleasure to the actions that enable us to survive, and not try to figure out some way where we want to keep the practice of eating. If we don't have to eat at all, again, we can just pop a pill into our mouth or something, then I think we would just say, well, let's figure out how to get rid of eating then, and transfer that pleasure over to whatever new activity we're engaged in to sustain ourselves. So there would be, I think, a transition period where we maybe solve the problem of nutrition, but we haven't yet figured out how to substitute for the pleasure we're losing from eating. And that would just be a gap. That would be a transition. And in that period, I don't think I'd say it's immoral to continue to eat for the pleasure, but I think that would be a relatively short-term situation. And, like today, I think you should basically eat things that are healthy for you and then try to make those taste as good as they can. And then, it's okay to eat something purely for the pleasure of it, I think, from time to time. But if you completely detached nutrition from the act of eating, then I think it would be a mistake to continue to try to derive pleasure from eating when it's no longer an activity that serves life. I mean, this whole thing is science fiction, as I said. I don't think we're anywhere close to that. I think we're incredibly ignorant about nutrition and food science. So, for practical purposes today, I don't think you face that choice. I think meat is still very plausibly part of the diet of a fully flourishing human being. So I don't think it's, well, there's no reason to eat meat and you would just do it for pleasure. I don't think that's the case. But as I say, if we ever develop to this point where nutrition is detached from eating, well, then I would say that, again, we should make the pill taste really good, or I don't know, make us high in some way or feel good. And the pleasure should be matched to the action, and we shouldn't just try to preserve this outmoded activity just because that's where we started out. So we should figure out better ways to live and then make sure that those ways are pleasurable to us.
If you'd like to keep up with everything I do, just go to charles2.com. If you'd like to enable me to do more, just go to patreon.com/charles2 and become a supporter. Thanks for listening.